The dog went down the cellar steps at 6:14 in the morning. Ray Cutler heard the creak of the old wooden door, heard the soft click of nails on concrete, and didn't think anything of it. Atlas had been exploring the farm since they arrived 2 days earlier. Every barn door, every fence post, every corner of the property Ray had not set foot on in 31 years. That was just Atlas. But at 6:14, Atlas went down into the cellar, and he did not come back up. By 6:45, Ray was standing at the top of the stairs calling him. By 7:10, Ray was standing at the bottom of the stairs, watching Atlas sit motionless in front of an old wooden cabinet that had been pushed against the far wall, his nose pressed to the gap at the bottom of the left door, not moving, not responding to his name, just sitting there, breathing slow and even, like he had found something that required his full attention, and nothing else in the world was allowed to interrupt him. Ray had trained with military working dogs for 11 years. He knew that posture. He knew exactly what it meant. It meant something was there. He just didn't know yet what kind of something. Ray Cutler grew up on 48 acres in Harlan County, Kentucky. Tobacco fields on the eastern edge, running down to a drainage ditch that filled every spring. A woodlot along the creek on the western side, mostly oak and poplar, with a stand of old-growth hemlock in the low corner that his grandfather had never cut, and his father had never cut, and Ray had always assumed would outlast all of them. A farmhouse that his grandfather had built by hand in 1941, 2 years before he shipped out to the Pacific, and 2 years before anyone on that road knew whether any of it would be worth coming back to. His grandfather came back. He came back, and he worked the land, and he passed it to Ray's father Earl, who worked it the same way. Without drama, without sentiment that you could see on the surface, just work and maintenance and the steady accumulation of seasons. Earl Cutler was not a complicated man in the way people usually mean when they say that. He was not simple. He read. He had opinions about things. He voted in every election, local and national, and he took that seriously in the way that people take things seriously when they understand that seriousness is the point. But he was not a man who talked about what mattered to him. He showed it instead. He showed it in the way he maintained the fence lines and cleared the drainage ditches and kept the barn roof in good repair even when the cost of it hurt. He showed it in the way he paid his property taxes by the 15th of October every year, which was the last acceptable date according to the county notice, because Earl Cutler was not a man who pushed deadlines on anything that could be done ahead of time. The land was the thing he loved most. Ray had always known that. He had not always been sure whether he was included in that love or separate from it. As a boy, he had sometimes felt like a feature of the property rather than a reason for it. Another thing to maintain, another thing to keep in good repair. He did not blame his father for that. He understood it better as he got older. Some men are not built for the kind of love that says itself out loud. They are built for the kind that shows up at 5 in the morning and does not stop until dark. Ray enlisted in the Marines the summer after his mother died. He was 19. His father drove him to the bus station in Harlan, shook his hand at the curb, and said, "The farm will be here when you get back." That was it. That was the send-off. Ray had thought about those words many times over the years, in Fallujah and in Helmand and in places he didn't talk about. He had thought about whether they were a promise or a statement of fact or something else entirely. He had never fully decided. He did 2 tours in Fallujah, then a third in Helmand Province. then a fourth that nobody talked about, in a place where the paperwork described the mission in terms so general they were essentially meaningless, which was how you knew the mission itself was not. He came back to Harlan County once in 2004 for 10 days. He and his father sat on the porch most evenings and didn't say much, and when Ray left, Earl stood at the edge of the driveway and watched the truck until it rounded the bend and was gone from sight. Ray saw him in the rearview mirror, standing there with his arms at his sides, still as a fence post, getting smaller. Ray called once a month after that. His father was not a phone person. The calls lasted about 4 minutes. Practical things, the weather, the tobacco, whether the creek had flooded. Once, a conversation about a new tractor that Earl was considering and ultimately did not buy because the financing terms struck him as unfavorable, and he had not survived 60 years of farming by agreeing to terms that struck him as unfavorable. In March of the previous year, Earl Cutler died of a stroke in the kitchen of the farmhouse he had lived in for 62 years. He was 78 years old. He had not been sick in any way that had announced itself. He had been outside the day before, splitting wood for the stove, which he still used because he said it heated the house better than the propane, and because splitting wood was something a man could do and feel the results of immediately, which was not always true of other things. A neighbor found him the next morning when the dog, Earl's old beagle, 12 years old and nearly deaf, was barking at the back door and would not stop. The beagle had to be put down a week later. The neighbor said he had gone off his food the day Earl died and never came back to it. Said he just wouldn't stop looking for Earl, going to the places Earl usually sat, the kitchen chair and the porch rocker and the spot by the barn where Earl liked to stand in the morning with his coffee and watch the field, going to each place and standing there for a while and then moving to the next one. Ray drove down from Ohio, where he had been living alone in a rented house since his retirement from the Corps, and buried his father in the family plot at the east end of the property, next to his mother and his grandfather. The ground was hard. It was March in Kentucky, and the ground was still half frozen, and the grave took longer to dig than it should have. Ray did it himself. He did not ask for help. He dug it with a spade and a pickaxe, and it took him most of a day, and when he was done, he sat beside it in the cold for a long time before he did anything else. Then he went back to Ohio, and for 7 months he didn't touch the estate paperwork at all. He knew he should. He had a list of things that needed to happen, and he did not do them. He went to work at the security consulting firm where he had been employed for 3 years, and he came home and he ate and he slept, and he did not call the county clerk's office or the probate court or the estate attorney whose name his father's lawyer had given him. He was not sure what he was waiting for. He thought sometimes that he was waiting to be ready, and other times he thought that being ready was not a thing that was going to happen, and that he should just act before it did. In October, he called the Harlan County Clerk's office to begin the probate transfer. A man named Denny Voss answered the phone. Ray had never heard the name. His father had never mentioned it in any of their 4-minute calls. But Denny Voss, it turned out, had been the deputy county clerk for 14 years, and he knew exactly who Ray was before Ray had finished introducing himself. He said, "You must be Earl's boy." Something about the way he said it was off. Not rude, not obviously wrong, just slightly too warm, in the way that something can be too warm when the warmth is being performed rather than felt. Ray filed it away. The call lasted 12 minutes. Voss was smooth, patient. He walked Ray through the process with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing something many times, the efficiency of a person who could do it in his sleep and knew it and wanted you to know it too. He said the deed transfer was straightforward and that he would pull the file personally and have everything ready. He said there was one small matter, a lien from 2011. Ray asked what kind of lien. Voss said it was a county services lien, emergency road grading. Apparently, Earl Cutler had requested emergency road maintenance on the private access road in the winter of 2011 after a flood damaged the surface, and the county had performed the work, and the invoice had never been paid, and with 14 years of interest and administrative penalties, it now totaled slightly over $22,000. Ray did not say anything for a moment. Then he asked if he could see the documentation. Voss said of course, absolutely. He would mail it out that week, no problem at all. The packet arrived 9 days later. It contained an invoice on county letterhead, a work order with a date and a description of services, and a signed request form at the front of the stack with Earl Cutler's signature at the bottom. Ray looked at the signature for a long time. He had seen his father's signature thousands of times, on checks, on birthday cards, on the deed to the property that Ray had found in the filing cabinet in the farmhouse office during one of the 4-minute call years when his father had mentioned needing to find it. On the letter Earl had left with his will, which Ray had finally opened in November after 6 months of it sitting on his kitchen table in Ohio. This signature was not right. It was close. It had the right general shape and the right rough proportion. Someone who had never looked carefully at Earl Cutler's signature might not have noticed anything, but the capital E in Earl was formed differently, the first stroke going up where Earl always brought it across, and the loop on the L in Cutler was tighter than his father ever made it, compressed in a way that suggested someone who had practiced copying the name, but had never developed the specific muscle memory that produces a genuine signature without thinking. Ray was not a handwriting expert. He had no training in document forensics, and he was fully aware that he might be wrong. But he had spent 11 years in environments where small things were often the only warning you got, and learning to notice small things and take them seriously was not a habit he had been able to turn off. He put the packet in a folder. He got Atlas from the backyard. He loaded the truck and drove to Kentucky. Atlas was a 4-year-old German shepherd that Ray had adopted from a military working dog retirement program 18 months earlier. He had been a patrol and detection dog attached to a ranger battalion, deployed twice to Afghanistan, and retired after a partial hearing loss in his left ear from a close-range blast event during a clearing operation in Kandahar province. The program coordinator had been straightforward about what Ray was getting into. She said Atlas had high drive and needed structured work, and without it, he became destructive in ways that were creative and thorough. She said his previous foster placement had lasted 11 days, ending when Atlas systematically removed the weather stripping from every exterior door in the house over the course of a single weekend. Ray had said that sounded like a dog who knew what he needed and was communicating it clearly, and she had looked at him for a moment and then said, "Yes, that's one way to put it." He signed the adoption papers and put Atlas in the truck, and they drove home, and Atlas sat in the passenger seat with his nose out the window for 4 hours, and Ray thought, "This is going to be fine." It was fine. It was better than fine. By the time they had been together 6 months, Atlas had become the most reliable presence in Ray's life, which was something Ray thought about sometimes in the evenings and did not fully know what to do with. Atlas was not easy. The coordinator had been right about that. He needed to run every day, long and hard. He needed problems to solve. He needed work that used his nose, which was a precision instrument that had been trained and reinforced over years and did not stop wanting to be used just because the deployments were over. Ray ran with him in the mornings. He did scent work in the evenings using a training kit he ordered online. He gave Atlas a job, and Atlas did the job, and in return, Atlas gave Ray his complete and undivided loyalty, which was not a small thing to give, and Ray understood that. By the time they reached Harlan County on that gray November afternoon, they had been together long enough that Atlas could read Ray's moods without effort, the way you learn to read the weather in a place you have lived for years. He knew when Ray needed quiet, and he knew when Ray needed company, and he knew the difference between the two, which was more than most people managed. And Ray, for his part, trusted Atlas in the way you trust something that has never been wrong about anything that mattered, which is why, when Atlas went down the cellar stairs at 6:14 in the morning and did not come back up, Ray eventually followed. The cabinet was standard farmhouse construction. Pine boards, old and dry, the grain raised slightly from decades of humidity cycling. 2 doors with brass latches that had gone green, the kind of cabinet you find in the back of farmhouse cellars because someone built it 50 years ago to hold canning jars, and then the farm changed, and the canning stopped, and the cabinet stayed because no one had a reason to move it. Ray opened the left door. Atlas did not move. He stayed in his seated position, nose still working the air at the gap along the bottom, methodical and patient in the way that trained detection dogs are patient when they have found a source and are waiting for the handler to confirm it. Inside the cabinet were 3 shelves. The top shelf held old mason jars, empty, the lids rusted to them. The middle shelf held a coffee can with some screws in the bottom, a flathead screwdriver, and a folded plastic bag that held nothing. The bottom shelf held a shoebox with a rubber band around it that had dried and cracked, but was still holding the lid down. Ray lifted the shoebox out and set it on the floor. He took the rubber band off carefully, not because it mattered, but because the care felt right. He lifted the lid. Inside were letters, personal correspondence going back years, the envelope still sealed on some of them, bank statements, photocopied tax receipts with handwritten notes in the margins, a folded county map with pencil marks on it that Ray did not yet understand, a small spiral notebook with a red cover, the kind you can buy at any drugstore, its pages swollen slightly with age, and at the very bottom of the box, in a sealed envelope with no name written on the outside, a folded document on heavier paper. Ray sat down on the cellar floor with the shoebox between his knees. Atlas lay down beside him and put his head on Ray's knee and let out a slow breath through his nose. Ray opened the heavy document first. It was a deed amendment, notarized in April of 2009, by a notary public whose stamp was registered in Harlan County. The language was dense and technical, in the way that legal documents are dense when they have been written to be difficult to read quickly, and Ray read it slowly, and read it again, and then sat with it for a while before he was sure he understood what it said. In April of 2009, the 48 acres that had belonged to the Cutler family since Earl's father bought them in 1938 had been subdivided. 22 acres along the western boundary, the creek frontage, the woodlot, the old-growth hemlock stand in the low corner, all of it had been transferred to a limited liability company called ICV Land Partners. The transfer had been recorded in the Harlan County Property Registry. The deed bore Earl Cutler's signature. Ray set the document down and picked up the spiral notebook. Earl Cutler had written in his notebook regularly, not daily. The entries were short and spaced out, sometimes a week apart, sometimes two. Practical things mostly. What the weather had done, what the fields needed, a note about the truck needing new brake pads, a calculation of what the tobacco would bring at the current rate, and whether it was worth the acreage he was giving it. But in April of 2009, the entries changed. April 3rd, Voss came by again, said the back taxes could be cleared if I signed. I told him I needed to see the full accounting first. He said there wasn't time. I said there is always time. April 7th. He came back with a man I didn't recognize. Said he was from the state office. The man didn't say much. Voss did all the talking. Said if I didn't resolve the tax matter by the end of the month, the county could place the land in a tax lien sale. I asked for the documentation again. Voss said it was in the county system, and I could come look at it. I have not been to that office in 30 years, and I did not like the way he said it. April 11th. Signed something this morning. Don't fully understand what I signed. Voss brought it to the house. Said it was a payment agreement. The other man witnessed it. I should have read it longer. My eyes are not what they were, and Voss kept talking the whole time I was trying to read. April 14th. Called the county tax office to ask about the balance. The woman on the phone said my account was current. No outstanding taxes. I asked her to repeat that. She said the same thing again. Current, no balance. I asked when it was paid. She said she couldn't see any recent payment, just that the balance showed zero. I don't understand what I signed. April 19th. Drove past the creek field this afternoon. There is a survey stake in the ground at the northwest corner. Orange flag. I have never put a stake in that field. I am going to pull it out and see what happens. April 22nd. A man came to the house, not Voss, younger. Told me the stake was a county survey marker and that removing it was a violation. I asked him to show me the survey order. He said it was on file at the county office. I asked for a copy. He said I could request one in writing. I said I want to do that now, and he said he didn't have the forms. I told him to leave. April 28th. I think I transferred the creek land. I think that's what I signed. I don't know. To who? I don't know how to fix it. Ray is overseas. I don't want to put this on him. Ray read that entry 3 times. He did not read anything else in the notebook. He set it down carefully on the floor beside him and sat in the cellar in the quiet that old farmhouse cellars have, the particular silence of a space below ground that has been holding still for decades. Atlas did not move. He stayed with his head on Ray's knee, breathing slow. Ray had spent most of his adult life in situations that required him to keep his hands steady when everything in him wanted to do otherwise. He was good at it. He had developed it into something close to a physical skill, the same way you develop the ability to hold a rifle still through practice and repetition until it became available to him whenever he needed it. He applied it now. He set the notebook down, restacked the documents in the shoebox in the order he had taken them out, with the sealed envelope at the bottom where he had found it. He replaced the lid. Then he picked up Atlas's face in both hands and looked at him for a moment, and Atlas looked back with the direct and uncomplicated attention that dogs bring to the people they have decided to belong to. Ray said, "Good boy." Then he went upstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table until he had a clear picture of what he intended to do. He did not contact Denny Voss. He did not call the county. He did not do anything that would signal to anyone that he had found the shoebox or that he understood what was in it. What he did was drive to Lexington and pay a flat consultation fee to a real estate litigation attorney named Claire Adkins, whose firm had handled adverse possession and deed fraud cases in eastern Kentucky for 15 years. He brought the shoebox. He sat across her desk and let her read everything without saying anything until she was done. She read for a long time. She went back through the notebook entries twice. She held the deed amendment at an angle to the light and looked at it for a while without speaking. Then she set it down and looked at Ray and said, "Your father was defrauded." She walked him through the mechanism. A county official with privileged access to property records targets a landowner who fits the profile. Elderly, living alone, no immediate family nearby. Maybe behind on taxes, maybe not. It didn't always matter because the debt could be fabricated or inflated in a system that the target had no way to independently verify. The official manufactures or exaggerates the liability, gets the owner to sign a payment agreement. The signature on the actual deed transfer is either forged separately or lifted from the agreement document and attached to the transfer through a substitution the target never sees. She said she had seen it before, not often, but enough to recognize the structure immediately. She said it was most prevalent in rural counties with limited oversight, small clerks' offices where one or two people controlled most of the records access, communities where people were reluctant to make accusations against county officials because those officials had been in place for years and were woven into the fabric of local life in ways that made confronting them feel impossible. She said the HCV Land Partners, LLC, had been registered in the state of Kentucky in February of 2009, 2 months before the transfer. She said that timing was meaningful. She said she would run the registered agent and get back to him. She told him not to contact Denny Voss, not to go to the county office, not to give any indication that he knew anything beyond the lien he had been told about on the phone. Ray said he understood. He drove back to the farm in the late afternoon, with the fields going gray in the November light, and Atlas in the passenger seat watching the road ahead with his habitual attentiveness, as though the road were a problem he was working on. Ray sat on the porch that evening for a long time after dark. He thought about his father sitting on this same porch for 15 years after that April, knowing something had been taken from him, not knowing the full shape of it, not knowing whether what he had signed was fully legal, fully binding, whether there was anything to be done, or whether the thing was just done, and he was living with it now, and not saying anything, not to Harold next door, not to the estate lawyer, not to Ray in any of those 4-minute phone calls. Ray thought about the entry from April 28th. "I don't want to put this on him." He sat with that for a long time. Claire Adkins called back 3 weeks later. The registered agent for HCV Land Partners was a man named Gerald Forsythe. Gerald Forsythe was Denny Voss's brother-in-law. They had been married to sisters for 22 years. She had also, in the course of pulling the chain of title on the Cutler property, run searches on adjacent and comparable transactions in the county record going back to 2003. She had found 3 other properties, all rural, all owned by elderly individuals living alone, that had been transferred to entities with structurally similar profiles, thin LLCs recently formed, registered agents with no apparent connection to the land being transferred. 2 of the original owners were deceased. 1 was still living, a woman in her mid-80s who had not known the transfer had occurred until Adkins called her. Adkins said she had already been in contact with the Kentucky Attorney General's office. There was a financial crimes division that had been running a quiet background inquiry into anomalies in rural county property records across eastern Kentucky for the better part of 2 years. The Cutler case, she said, was the best documented instance they had encountered. The notebook was the thing. Contemporaneous handwritten records from the victim, dated, specific, naming the actor. She said they would need Ray's cooperation and a sworn statement covering everything from the initial phone call with Voss to the discovery of the shoebox. She said the case was strong. Ray asked about recovering the 22 acres. She said that was a separate track and would take longer. The LLC would contest any forced divestiture even as the criminal case proceeded, but with the evidence they had, she was confident. Ray asked how long confident meant in real time. She said probably 2 years from filing. Ray said that was fine. He had been gone from this place for 31 years. 2 more years was a number he could hold. He told her to proceed. The investigation developed the way legal and governmental machinery develops, which is to say, slowly at first, with long stretches where nothing seemed to be happening, and then in concentrated bursts when something moved. The AG's office formally opened the inquiry in September. By November, they had extended the scope to include 2 additional counties. By December, the count of potentially affected properties had reached 7. The estimated total land value across all of them calculated at slightly over $4 million. Denny Voss had been the clerk or acting clerk on 5 of the 7 questionable transactions. The Gerald Forsythe entity was connected to 3 of them. 2 additional names appeared in the registered agent records across the broader network. One of those names matched a prior federal conviction for mail fraud in Tennessee from 2001. Voss was placed on administrative leave from the county clerk's office in November. He was indicted in February of the following year on 8 counts: fraud, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, abuse of public trust, the full weight of what he had done laid out in a document that ran to 41 pages. Ray was not in Harlan the day the indictment was filed. He was at the farm, where he had been living since the previous October. He had decided to stay. The farmhouse needed more work than he had initially thought, which was what farmhouses do when you look at them honestly. The roof over the back bedroom had 2 sections that needed full replacement, not repair. The kitchen plumbing was an accumulation of decades of patchwork, each fix addressing the immediate problem and creating the conditions for the next one. And the honest answer was that it needed to come out and be redone properly. The barn floor had a soft section near the east wall where water had been getting in for years and working at the joists beneath it. Ray spent the winter on the house the way he had spent deployments, making a list, establishing priorities, working through the list in order without rushing and without getting ahead of himself. He was not a contractor. He had not done this kind of work, but he was methodical, and he knew how to learn things, and he had the time, which is the resource that makes most things possible if you are willing to use it. Atlas was with him for all of it. That was how Ray thought about it. Not that Atlas followed him around, but that Atlas was with him, which was a different thing. The distinction was about intention. Atlas had made a decision about where he was going to be, and he was being there, fully and deliberately, in the way that working dogs commit to things when they have decided they are worth committing to. He would position himself somewhere with good sight lines to wherever Ray was working and stay there watching, occasionally shifting his position when Ray moved far enough that the angles changed, not demanding attention, not underfoot, just present and watchful, taking his job seriously. Ray had spent a significant portion of his adult life around men who took their jobs seriously in exactly that way, and he recognized it and respected it accordingly. The neighbors began to appear as winter settled in. Harold Birch came first, with a covered dish and an apology for not coming sooner, and stayed 2.5 hours and talked about Earl in the way that people who have known someone for 40 years can talk about them, not with the summary version you get from eulogies, but with the specific, accumulated texture of shared time. He said Earl had seemed different after 2009, quieter in a way that hadn't been there before, more guarded. He said he had assumed it was just age, the way people do when someone they know gets older and changes, fitting the change to the explanation that requires the least investigation. Ray told him what had actually happened. Harold sat across the kitchen table and was quiet for a while after that. Then he said, "I wish he had told someone. I wish he had come to me." Ray said he understood why he hadn't. Harold started coming on Saturday mornings, usually around 8, and they would walk the property together, and Harold would point things out. Where Earl had let the woodlot expand after he reduced the tobacco acreage in his later years. The fence line along the creek field that Earl had rebuilt post by post over 2 summers. The access road, which Earl had maintained himself for 14 years, with gravel he sourced from a supplier in the next county, and spread by hand, because he was not going to call the county for anything, not ever, not after what happened. That detail lodged in Ray's chest and stayed there. 14 years of maintaining a road by hand, alone in his 60s and then his 70s, buying gravel and spreading it himself after every winter, because he had decided that needing nothing from the people who had wronged him was the only form of dignity available to him. Ray thought about his father doing that every spring, the physical work of it, the quiet, unrepeated statement it made. In March, the creek land came back. The LLC had filed for dissolution in January, facing the weight of the criminal indictment and the AG's investigation and the cost of contesting an adverse possession and fraud recovery action that their own attorneys had presumably told them they were going to lose. Adkins had been in settlement discussions with their legal representation since February. In the second week of March, they reached an agreement. No compensation paid to the Cutler estate, no admission of liability, which was a standard ask and meant nothing in the context of the criminal proceedings. The 22 acres returned to Ray Cutler in full. Adkins called him on a Tuesday morning. He was in the barn working on the east wall joist that had been giving him trouble for 6 weeks. He had the floorboards up and was lying on his back in the crawl space beneath the barn floor with a headlamp and a pry bar when his phone rang. He crawled out and answered it. She told him it was done. He thanked her and put the phone in his chest pocket and stood there in the barn in the cold March light coming through the gaps in the siding. Atlas was at the barn door in his usual position. He had been lying down, and now he was sitting up, watching Ray with the attentive readiness he shifted to whenever the quality of Ray's stillness changed. Ray walked out of the barn and down the slope to the east end of the property to the family plot. He stood at the fence for a while. His grandfather's stone was the oldest, the inscription worn smooth by 80 years of weather. His mother's stone was next to it with the small ceramic bluebird that Earl had placed there not long after the funeral and never removed. The glaze of it faded now, but still holding its blue. And Earl's stone, newer than the others, still carrying the crisp edges that new granite has before the seasons start to work at it. Ray talked to his father for a few minutes. He did not remember afterward exactly what he said. The words were not the kind that needed to be remembered. Then he walked the full perimeter of the property, all 48 acres. He had not done it since he was 18 years old, the summer before his mother got sick, when he used to run the fence line in the mornings, because he was 18 and had energy he didn't know what to do with. He walked it slowly now. The creek was running high on the March melt, the water carrying the particular color of Kentucky limestone streams in spring, something between amber and brown and clear all at once. The willows at the bend were still bare, but you could see the green starting in the tips of the branches, the first definite statement that winter was negotiating its end. The old-growth hemlock stand in the low corner looked the way it always looked, which was permanent, which was the way his grandfather had intended it to look when he decided not to cut it. Atlas walked beside him the whole way. They did not hurry. The criminal trial was set for October. Ray would testify. Adkins had been preparing him with the methodical thoroughness that he appreciated in her, walking through his testimony in sequence, asking the questions the defense would ask, making sure he was not going to be caught off guard by anything. Ray was not a man who needed much preparation for the experience of sitting in a room with people who wanted to unsettle him and declining to be unsettled. He had significant training in that. What he did not expect was what happened 2 weeks before the trial. He was in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, early in the way he was always early, standing at the counter with his coffee. Atlas was at the back door. That meant he wanted to go out. And Ray opened the door, and Atlas went down the porch steps and across the yard to the cellar door. Not running, not with any urgency. The same deliberate, purposeful walk he used when he knew where he was going and why. Ray stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment. Then he followed. Atlas was at the cabinet. Same position as the first morning, same focused attention. But the cabinet was nearly empty now. Most of what had been on the shelves, the shoebox, the notebook, most of the documents, had been given to Adkins for the case file months earlier. Ray had left the mason jars and the coffee can and the screwdriver and a few other things of no significance. There was nothing there for a detection dog to find, except that Atlas was finding something. Ray opened both doors this time. He stood and looked at the interior carefully. He pulled the middle shelf out. He took the mason jars down. He ran his hand along the back of the cabinet and felt it. The back panel on the right side was sitting slightly proud of where it should be, a millimeter or two. The kind of thing you would attribute to old wood warping and humidity if you were not looking for it. He pressed on it. It flexed. He got the screwdriver from the middle shelf and worked the panel loose from the edges. It came free, and he set it aside. Behind the panel was a narrow space, the gap between the cabinet back and the cellar wall. In that space, taped to the interior face of the panel with a strip of painter's tape that had yellowed with age, was an envelope. Ray took the envelope out. He looked at it. Nothing written on the outside. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Earl Cutler's handwriting, the handwriting Ray knew. Not the practiced capital E of someone who had studied it and tried to reproduce it. The real thing. Ray, if you are reading this, something happened and you found the box. I put this behind the panel so you would find it after the other things. I wanted the other things to be first because they are proof and you will need them. I want to tell you that I am sorry for signing what I signed. I should have called you. You were overseas, and I did not want to put it on you, and that was my mistake. I have thought for a long time about whether to try to fix it myself. I am not a lawyer, and I do not know exactly what I signed, and I am too old and too stubborn to admit to someone in this county that I let them trick me. What I know is that you are a Marine, and you know how to do hard things. I know that you will come back here eventually because you have always been this land, and this land has always been you, even when you were far away. The creek field is still yours. Even if it does not say so on paper, it is yours. Your grandfather swam in that creek. I swam in that creek. You swam in that creek when you were 5 years old, and you were afraid to, and you got in anyway. That is still true. None of what they did changes that. I am proud of you. I did not say that enough. I am saying it now. Come home when you can. Dad. Ray sat down on the cellar floor. He read the letter twice, not because he hadn't understood it the first time. He just wanted to read it twice. Atlas lay down with his head on Ray's knee. Neither of them moved for a long time. The cellar was quiet, in the way that cellars are quiet. The particular silence of a space below, ground in an old house, holding still while the world continues on above it. You could hear the house faintly, the creak of it in the morning, the sound of the wind against the east side. Ray sat with his father's handwriting in his hands and the dog's weight on his knee, and the silence around both of them. The trial began in the second week of October. Denny Voss appeared in court in a dark suit that Ray thought looked like it had been bought for the occasion. He pleaded not guilty on all 8 counts. His attorney's defense was administrative, errors, record-keeping failures, the complexity of rural county systems in which multiple employees handled documents over long periods of time, mistakes that looked like fraud but were, when examined properly, the understandable product of an overburdened office with insufficient oversight. The notebook dismantled that defense one entry at a time. April 3rd, April 7th, April 11th, April 14th, April 19th, April 22nd, April 28th. Earl Cutler had written it all down in the same careful, unpretentious hand he used to record the frost date and the cost of brake pads and whether the tobacco was worth the acreage. He had written it because he was a man who kept records of what mattered, because keeping records was a way of insisting that things had happened and could not be made to unhappen, even if you had no way at the time of doing anything about them. He had not known that his son would find it. He had written it knowing only that it was true, and that true things deserved to be written down. The jury deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. On the afternoon of the second day, they returned a verdict of guilty on 6 of the 8 counts. The 2 acquittals were on the lesser administrative charges. On the 6 substantive counts, including forgery and abuse of public trust, the verdict was unanimous. Gerald Forsythe had pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud in a separate plea proceeding 3 weeks earlier. The 2 additional network members had entered plea agreements. The full structure had come apart, the way structures built on deception tend to come apart when someone starts pulling at them because there is nothing underneath holding them together. Voss was sentenced to 9 years. Ray was outside on the courthouse steps when Adkins called with the verdict. He had not been in the courtroom for the reading. He had testified and left because he did not need to see the man's face at the moment the verdict was delivered, and he did not want to mistake that impulse for something more important than it was. He stood on the steps and listened to Adkins and looked at the street, Harlan County, on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The old hardware store across the way with its hand-lettered sign, a woman pushing a stroller on the sidewalk, talking on her phone, 2 men outside the coffee shop talking about something that was making one of them laugh. The town going about its Tuesday the way it always had and always would, indifferent to what had just been decided inside, carrying all of its ordinary weight forward. Ray thanked Adkins and hung up. He thought about his father driving to this building once a month to pay his property taxes by the 15th of October, every year without exception, because Earl Cutler was not a man who pushed deadlines on anything, and because this was the building where the deadline was kept, and because he had come here his whole life and the county had no idea what it had done to him, and he was going to continue coming here on schedule because that was who he was, and nobody was going to take that from him too. Ray stood there for another minute. Then he walked to the truck and drove home. The 48 acres looked different in October than they had in March. The woodlot had gone amber and rust, and deep burgundy at the edges where the sumac grew in the open patches. The field was done for the year, the ground turned under, the smell of it clean and cold. The creek was running low, the summer having taken most of the volume, and the water was clear over the limestone now, the bottom fully visible, every stone in place. The willows at the bend had dropped most of their leaves. They stood bare above the water, their branches hanging still in the cold air, waiting. Ray parked the truck and walked to the creek. Atlas walked beside him down the slope through the dead grass, unhurried, taking in the afternoon the way dogs take in afternoons, which is completely and without reservation. They stood at the bank. The water moved over the limestone. The willows stood. The sky was the color of old pewter, the way it gets in Harlan County in October when the light is leaving earlier each day, and the hills are keeping it longer in the mornings before releasing it. Ray looked at the creek for a while. He thought about his grandfather. He thought about his father. He thought about a 5-year-old boy standing at this same bank, afraid to get in. He took off his boots and his socks and rolled his pants up to his knees. The water was cold. The limestone was smooth under his feet, worn smooth by water and time, the kind of smooth that takes decades to accumulate. The current ran against his ankles, gentle and indifferent, the same current that had been here before any of the Cutlers and would be here after, carrying nothing but itself. He stood until his feet went numb, and then a little longer. Then he got out and sat on the bank and put his boots back on, while Atlas stood nearby, looking at something across the field with that focused, distant attention dogs turn toward things humans cannot see. Ray stood up. There was work to do. There was always work to do on a farm in October, before the ground froze, and the window for outdoor work closed for the season. The back bedroom roof needed one more day. The kitchen plumbing was scheduled for next week. The fence posts along the woodlot needed resetting before the ground hardened. He had a list. He worked through his lists. He walked back up the slope toward the farmhouse, with Atlas beside him, the afternoon light flat and cold across the field, the old house sitting at the top of the rise, the way it had always sat, solid and unhurried, waiting for whoever was coming up the hill. He was home.